Haha, so you knew it was coming, man. We absolutely had to go out there and make this video because yesterday, the NHL world was set ablaze. No, we're not talking about Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk and the Maple Leaf series with the Florida Panthers. No, we're talking about the draft lottery, folks. Because yesterday, the Utah Hockey Club ended up going from pick number 14 all the way to pick number 4. And subsequently, you had the New York Islanders who went from pick number 10 to pick number 1. 2 draft lottery winners that were not in the bottom of the rankings. Instead, you had New York and Utah making history and giving themselves a stellar opportunity to drafting the next parts of their future. The Vancouver Canucks, though, were hovering around the 15th overall spot, and they ended up not winning any lotteries. They went from 15th overall to 15th overall. A whole bunch of the other teams either dropped by 1 or dropped by 2, but Vancouver ended up sticking around and not moving an inch. Now, this is where we get into the Vancouver screwed themselves talk, because yesterday, after the lottery, you had Thomas Drance tweet out this: "The layers of NHL Draft Lottery pain are always textured for the Vancouver Canucks." Vancouver finished 1 point ahead of the Utah Hockey Club. The Canucks trailed the Stars by 3 goals with 60 seconds to play in Game 77. If not for that improbable comeback, Vancouver would have won draw number 2. Also, we have the Rangers staying in the top 13 of the 2025 NHL Draft. Now, let's talk about the last thing first. The New York Rangers staying in the top 13 of the draft is important because the pick that New York sent over to Vancouver in the JT Miller trade was a protected top 13 pick. The Rangers staying in the top 13 means that the pick that got traded in the Miller trade has now been defined as their unprotected 2026 first-round pick. The problem is, though, Vancouver didn't keep the New York Rangers first, as they sent it to Pittsburgh in the Marcus Pettersson trade. The theory here is that because the New York Rangers pick is now unprotected, Vancouver loses out on a chance to get a high pick, because if the Rangers suck in 2025-2026, then their unprotected 2026 first is going to be so high that maybe Vancouver would have missed out because they sent that pick away. They don't have it anymore. It's going to be Pittsburgh's now. So that second part, Rangers staying in the top 13, it does affect the Vancouver Canucks in some way. But that first point is even more interesting because the Vancouver Canucks could have had themselves a chance to win the second draw and to be in Utah's place had they just finished below Utah in the standings. They would have gotten it. The Utah Hockey Club finished with 89 points this season. The Canucks had 90. Now, there is an extra element to it, though. Rob Williams says, "I thought the same thing, but the Canucks also finished 1 point ahead of Columbus, so they needed the overtime loss in that Dallas Stars game." But, admittedly, the calculation gets a little bit muddy, because the Vancouver Canucks, if they had themselves a regulation loss, okay, they would have gotten to 88 points. They would have been underneath Columbus and Utah. However, if Vancouver was able to get the overtime loss against Dallas, yes, they would have tied Columbus and Utah in the points race, but Columbus and Utah still would have beaten them out in regulation wins, so it's the same outcome. Vancouver would not have had the chance to take that spot, although this doesn't even just boil down to the Dallas Stars overtime loss or overtime win scenario, because the Vancouver Canucks were so close to the Utah Hockey Club in the standings. They were just 1 point ahead. Had things gone a little bit differently throughout the season, had the Canucks just played a little bit worse at times, they would have had a much better chance not only at that 14th spot to 4, but they could have been as bad to maybe reach what the Islanders did too. The Islanders only had 8 fewer points than the Vancouver Canucks this year. That's a pretty significant amount, not gonna lie, but the Vancouver Canucks, with all their overtime losses piling up too, it becomes a little bit difficult to fully encapsulate how close they were to actually winning the draft lottery here. So I do think that Drance's point still does make sense here, even though the specific outcome of the Dallas Stars game didn't have as much of an impact in putting the Canucks in a better spot to winning the draft lottery. Had the Canucks lost that Dallas Stars game, they would have been overtaken by Utah and Columbus. You would have had probably Columbus winning that 4th overall pick instead of Utah. And the same thing would have happened for Vancouver if they ended up losing that Dallas Stars game in overtime. One thing's for sure, though. If the Vancouver Canucks didn't get those 2 points and then they got some extra points elsewhere, they got some regulation wins, or they had a few other losses throughout, things would have been so different, and they would have been even closer to drafting 4th. It's just so frustrating, man. The Vancouver Canucks have never won the draft lottery before, right? Is that the correct way to interpret that stat? Expansion Bros in Buffalo had themselves the 1st overall pick when Vancouver and Buffalo got introduced to the league, not to mention Buffalo getting Dahlin and Owen Power later on. Vancouver has never won, and they will continue to not win as long as they stay in this mediocre state. The Islanders had a few wins throughout the years even too. Rick DiPietro, John Tavares, and now Matthew Schaefer. Let somebody else have it for once, man. The Utah Hockey Club didn't win a 1st or a 2nd overall pick, but they did win the lottery, so that is a victory for them in the NHL record books. For Vancouver, though, I don't know, it's just unfortunate. I mean, they have had high picks in the past. They did hold on to the 1st overall pick for a brief moment in 1999, but they traded it away in order to grab the Sedin twins picks, so that, of course, is much different than what we are looking at nowadays. They traded up into making that happen. They didn't win the lottery, per se. So with this in mind, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Thomas Drance's tweet over here in discussing how the Vancouver Canucks were so close to being in Utah's spot to potentially move up 10 picks in the 2025 NHL Draft? It's not a direct scenario. It's not like, oh, if one thing went differently against Dallas, they would have won. But it is a combination of close enough factors that I do think we can dive into it here and say that the Canucks were just a little bit further off than they needed to be. With that in mind, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.